Let me read to you a passage from the 5th chapter of St. Luke's Gospel, verses 12 to 16. It's the Gospel for Friday after the Epiphany. St. Luke writes, "While Jesus was in one of the towns, a man came along who was covered with leprosy. When he saw Jesus, he fell with his face to the ground and begged him, 'Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean.' Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. 'I am willing,' he said, 'be clean.' And immediately the leprosy left him. Then Jesus ordered him, 'Don't tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing, as a testimony to them.' Yet the news about him spread all the more, so that crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed." That's from Luke chapter 5, verse 12 to 16. What does it suggest to us? Well, there is an unending trail of sorrow in the world, and to a greater or lesser extent in the lives of many individuals. There is much disappointment. For instance, a couple marry, they are religious, they are generous. They wish to have a large family, but they have no children at all. It is a tremendous disappointment to them. Or again, a different couple likewise wish to have a large family, and they do, but one of their children is seriously incapacitated, either physically or mentally. Another gradually gives up his Christian faith. Another has to live through a broken marriage. Another fails in his chosen career. All this can be a serious test of religious faith, especially if there has been much prayer of petition. Where is God, and why is he allowing this suffering? If one examines the myths and rites of religion over the ages, one does get the impression that man tends to think that while the gods have the power, they do not care much. If they are not imprecated, if they are not mollified, if they are not acknowledged especially by the observance of the rites, then needy and vulnerable man will not attract their notice. Indeed, the highest gods seem to withdraw to a faraway setting, and the workings of human life are left to lesser deities. Of course, there is a very real grain of truth in all of this, for the divine will must be obeyed. But the point that I'm raising here is the attitude of the divine towards suffering man. It has often, very often, been perceived as one of basic disinterest. The gods seem unconcerned at man's plight. Well, let us see this perception represented in the heartfelt petition expressed by our leper in the Gospel of today. Seeing Jesus, he fell at his feet with the following statement, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." The direct petition to heal him is obviously implied, but it is a statement that also implicitly asks our Lord if he is willing to help. Are you unconcerned? He knows that Jesus is concerned because our Lord is profoundly good, but the statement with its petition may be taken as a symbol of the hidden cry of needy and vulnerable man. "Oh God, are you willing to help me and take away the evil from which I am suffering?" Jesus says he is and proves it. "I am willing," he said, "be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him. But then Jesus says, "Don't tell anyone." Don't tell anyone. What this suggests is that While our Lord was deeply concerned for the terrible physical suffering, indeed all the suffering of all persons, it was not for this that he had come. He was not just a healer. There were vast numbers of lepers in the ancient world, but our Lord had not come to heal them all. He healed some, indeed many, but his mission was clearly not to take away all suffering from the world. An end to all suffering would indeed come to those who entered the kingdom, but only at the end when he comes again. In his message for the 2014 World Day of the Sick, Pope Francis observed that Jesus did not remove illness and suffering from human experience, but by taking them upon himself, he transformed them and gave them new meaning. Jesus himself embraced suffering, although it is not to be imagined that he chose all, any, and every kind of suffering in every possible circumstance. He had the joy of 30 years with his mother at Nazareth, and much of that time with his holy foster father Joseph. Other ordinary joys he experienced and accepted in his life. He was not himself sick or infirm, but enjoyed an abiding full health. But many great sorrows came his way, such as that of seeing one of his specially chosen 12 disaffect and betray him. He embraced all the sufferings which his mission and the divine will entailed, and supremely those flowing from the witness he bore to himself and the divine plan. Mysteriously, the divine plan was that precisely through his obedience within immense suffering, the sin of the world would be atoned, and the world would be granted the inestimable gift of redemption. It has been revealed to us that because of the sin of man, suffering, death entered the world, and with sin, that death brought suffering. Suffering is the terrible consequence of the human choice of sin. God became man not to eliminate this suffering, but to transform it and make it the means of a far greater life, both here and hereafter. Because of Christ's passion, death, and resurrection, our suffering and even death can serve as a vehicle and gateway to everlasting happiness. The one condition is that our sufferings be borne in union with God, and Christ is the way to God. I am the way, he said. As our Lord's public ministry progressed, we see a drawing back from an abundant exercise of his healing ministry, because his mission was being misinterpreted and his true message ignored. The healings were but a sign, as St. John calls them in his Gospel. He had come to eliminate a far greater evil from the world and from the lives of men, provided they put their faith in him and choose to be his disciples. That evil was sin and the absence of union with God. He had come to take away the sin of the world and to bestow on repentant man the gift of a share in his own divine life. This would come by their choosing to be his disciples, by believing in him, being baptized into his life, and living as true members of his church.